Let's review properties of multiplication. Specifically, let's focus on the commutative, associative, and distributive properties. Let's start with looking at the commutative property of multiplication. In this definition, it says, the order of the factors does not change the product, does not change the product. So here we have the number sentence, 7 times 4 equals 28. 7 and 4 are the factors, 28 is the product. The definition tells us that it doesn't matter which order the factors go in. So we had 7 times 4 is 28, and we also have 4 times 7 is 28. Think about how that could help you solve a problem. Let's think about how the commutative property of multiplication could help you solve a number sentence where you have an unknown or a letter in your equation. Here we have 57 times 6 is equal to 6 times n. Well, you know when you have an equal sign that both sides of this equation have to be the same. So if 57 times 6 is equal to 6 times n, n must be 57, because the commutative property states that it doesn't matter which order the factors go in, the product will be the same. So we can write this equation as 57 times 6 equals 6 times 57. So n is equal to 57. Now let's look at the associative property of multiplication. Once again, let's start with the definition. The way the factors are grouped does not change the product. Always complete the work in the parentheses first. So in these number sentences or equations, we have 1, 2, 3 factors. The order in which we multiply the factors does not change the product. So we see that 5 times 2 times 4 is equal to 5 times 8, which is equal to 40. We could also write this as 5 times 2 times 4, where we grouped the 5 and the 2 together, in which case we would do the problem inside the parentheses first, or the work inside the parentheses. 5 times 2 is 10, and then we go ahead and multiply it by the 4, and it also equals 40. And that's what's shown in these two statements. Here we have two expressions that have 3 factors. In the first, we have 4, and then in the parentheses, 4 times 2 times 3, which are in the parentheses. If we were to go ahead and solve this or simplify this equation, we would do what was in the parentheses first. 2 times 3 is equal to 6. We would go ahead then and then multiply 4 times 6, which would equal 24. The associative property says that it doesn't matter in which order you have the factors or which work that you do first with multiplication. It matters that you do what's in the parentheses first. So here we have 4 times 2, which is 8, and then we multiply that times 3, it also equals 24. You can see that the order in which we did the work did not affect the outcome or the product. So it didn't matter which order we did the factors or multiplied the factors, we still had the same product. Now let's turn our attention to the distributive property of multiplication. The definition says, think of one of the factors as the sum of 2 addends. Then multiply each addend by the other factor and add the product. This means to think of the number 11 here, this is a factor, as the sum of 2 addends. 8 plus 3. 8 is an addend and 3 is an addend. And then multiply the other factor by both addends. So here you'll see that the 3 is multiplied by 8, and then that same 3 is multiplied by 3. And then just like with the commutative property, you do the work, or the associative property, you do the work that's in the parentheses. So here we have 3 times 8 is equal to 24. 3 times 3 is equal to 9. And lastly, it says to add the two amounts that you got within the parentheses together to come up with your final answer. 24 plus 9 is 33. Let's use the distributive property to help us think about solving this problem. So it says think of one of the factors as being a sum of two addends, and then multiply the other factor by both of the addends, adding the product of those two things together. So here we have 8 multiplied by 5 first, times 5, and then I have to add it, plus 8 times 2. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 8 times 2 is 16, so my product is equal to 56. Here we have an expression where the distributive property has already been applied. What I see is that there's a 6 and a times in both sets of parentheses. So I'm going to take now and put the 6 and the times outside of the parentheses. Now I need to think about what would go in the parentheses. So I have the number 2, and I also have the plus sign, and I have the number 3 that's left over. So what I will do now to show the distributive property is I will put the 2 plus the 3 in the parentheses. Now we can see that we can go from the distributive property being applied back to the original equation. When you see an expression where the distributive property has already been applied, you can look at the things that the work in parentheses have in common, such as 6 times and 6 times, and you can reverse the distributive property by pulling that first factor out and putting the two addends back into the parentheses. Here's one more time looking at the different properties of multiplication. Remember, these properties of multiplication can help you to solve equations and other problems.